So let us look at paper 2, Indian administration, this year's paper 2. So what are the observations we can make regarding this paper? First and foremost, like the previous year, it is more of a GS kind of paper, general studies kind of paper. Second, questions are also on expected lines. Not even a single question is there which is unexpected or which is difficult. The paper is quite easy. And third, the questions again as usual, it requires good knowledge of economics. Like with paper 1, this also requires good knowledge of economics. This is what and fourth, of course, these second ERC reports as usual are very important. So let us look at all the questions. In the text of Arthashastra, the state is neither a police state nor merely a tax gathering state. So basically the question is almost repeated every year in different forms. Basically the question says that Arthashastra is not only about a regulatory state, Arthashastra is not only about the functions to be performed by the state in the form of regulatory functions. It also focuses on what we call welfare aspects. It also focuses on welfare aspects. What Kautilya has said is that if you look at the whole text of Arthashastra, first Kautilya has said that the king has to strengthen his position. The king has to focus on expanding the frontiers of his empire, so that when the empire is strong, emperor will become much more stronger also. It becomes difficult for neighboring states to declare war on the empire. That is the reason why the first responsibility of the king is to make sure that his empire becomes much more stronger. And second, once he strengthens his position, Kautilya has said that the king should focus on welfare aspects. He was the first thinker to talk about the concept of good governance. He said that the king definitely has to protect the people, the king has to maximize his revenues. But beyond this, the king has to do many other things also. And he said that the king should focus on good governance. That is what Kautilya's famous dictum also talks about. In the happiness of his subjects lies his happiness. In their welfare, his welfare. The king shall do everything that would please his subjects and shall not do anything that would please himself. So you have to talk about all the welfare aspects of Kautilya's Arthashastra. You talk about progressive taxation. You talk about a king taking care of the needs of the people. You talk about the king spending 75% of its revenues only on capital expenditure and welfare of the people. Then you talk about king should be should make himself available to the people all the time, accessibility. And then you talk about Yatha Raja Tata Praja, as is the king, so shall be the subjects. So you have to focus on all these things while writing the answer. It is not only about a regulatory state, more importantly it is about a welfare state. That is what he has to, you have to focus on. Next, the economic reforms have significantly infringed the basic values and spirits of the Indian constitution. This question again keep on being asked, whether it is your political governance paper or Indian administration. The question is always repeated. The question says that economic reforms have significantly infringed the basic values and spirit of the Indian constitution. Examine. Basically, when you talk about the values of our constitution, one of the important values that we talk about is socialism. As part of socialism, we say that the state must take the responsibility of redistribution of income and wealth in favor of the poorer sections of society. That is what we call inclusive and equitable growth. The critics of liberalization have said that in the name of privatization, in the name of liberalization, state has abandoned its responsibility of maximizing welfare of people in favor of the private sector. And that is what the question talks about. They have significantly infringed the basic values and spirits of the constitution. But we don't agree with the statement. That is what you have to say. Why? You have to give the examples. Since the implementation of economic reforms in 1991, India has removed more number of people from poverty line than at any point of time in its 5,000-year-old history. If you go by the government statistics, it is only 6% of our population who are living below poverty line. So definitely the objectives of socialism are achieved much more efficiently through liberalization than through state control of factors of production. Similarly, one of the important values of our constitution is giving freedom to the people. Liberalization has given freedom to the people. As Amartya Sen defined, he defined independence as freedom. He defined development as freedom. And that is what economic reforms have done. People could come out of the inefficient, costly public sector enterprises, and they have more choices now. That is what our constitution basically also talks about. So we don't agree with the statement. You have to give all the facts, how the poverty has been removed, how people have been given choices in terms of service delivery mechanisms, and how people have also got choices in terms of employment job opportunities. And then after writing all these things, as part of your conclusion, you have to mention that the economic reforms have definitely helped, but at the same time, they have also widened the inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth. Top 100 billionaires in India, they own almost more than 10% of GDP, which clearly shows the kind of inequalities that we have in our country. So that is the reason why you say the state still plays a significant role in achieving the objectives of inclusive and equitable growth. That should be your conclusion. Next, yeah. Which one? Socialism. That is what I am saying. The objective of socialism is to remove inequalities. And the instruments of socialism can be either state or markets. Markets have achieved the objectives of socialism much more efficiently than the state. That is what we are saying. After 1991, when we adopted these economic reforms, we have removed, as we have mentioned, more number of people below poverty line than at any point of time in our 5,000-year-old history. So definitely the objectives of socialism have been achieved much more efficiently after we implemented the economic reform than before. So we don't agree with the statement. Next, Macaulay's ideas on Indian civil services correspond to the elite theory of bureaucracy which continues to persist. Do you agree? Justify. Yes, definitely. Lord Macaulay's ideas on Indian civil services, he wanted bureaucrats to be coming from very well-off backgrounds. That is the reason why during the British times, who were able to get into ICS, Indian Civil Services at that point of time, mostly the graduates from London, the Oxford and Cambridge universities. And later, when Indians were allowed into civil services, it was only rich people who could go to London and take the examination. And the Britishers made sure that whoever got into civil services, they developed what we call them as colonial attitudes, elitist attitudes. And the question says that the same even continues to persist now also. Do we agree? Definitely we agree. Even though after independence we try to change the elitist nature of our bureaucracy by making it more representative in its character. How did we make it more representative in its character? Through affirmative action, through reservations. After independence, we implemented the reservations so that our bureaucracy represents different sections of society, whether it is scheduled castes or scheduled tribes or OBCs. But in spite of the fact that we have implemented reservations for more than 70 years, we could not remove the elitist character of our bureaucracy. That is what we say. Why? Because our training methods are still colonial in nature. And then you talk about the solutions. You talk about civil services reforms to sensitize bureaucracy to the problems of the people so that they shed their elitist character and develop or inculcate democratic values. That is what should be your conclusion. Next, there has been an opinion that the ethos of Indian judicial system continues to be colonial. Suggest measures for raising the level of judicial excellence for achieving speedy justice. Almost similar question to the previous one. This is what we say. Whether it is civil services or judiciary or any other institution in India, the most unfortunate thing is that whether it is political executive also, they continue to be colonial in nature. So what is the colonial aspect of the functioning of judiciary in India? They are highly secretive. The judiciary functioning is highly secretive in nature. Judiciary is only one of the institutions which are stubborn, which are refusing to come under the purview of RTI. Second, the colonial nature, they are not accountable to anyone. They do not want to make themselves accountable to anyone, especially to the citizens. They are using the immunity provided to them in the constitution to make themselves completely unaccountable and dictatorial. Third, they are dictatorial in their functioning. They are also highly dictatorial in their functioning. Fourth, they are more interested in protecting and promoting their privileges than in improving their efficiency. So, if you talk about these things, definitely you say that judiciary in India is still colonial in its character. The question says that what should be done to raise the levels of judicial excellence for achieving speedy justice? What should be done? Obviously, you have to say that transparency, accountability. You must ensure again good governance in the functioning of judiciary. They must be brought under RTA to ensure transparency. There must be accountability in the functioning of judiciary. How to ensure accountability? Whatever the cases that come up in front of them, they must be able to come out with the judgments within a stipulated time period. Just to give one example here, recently in the United Kingdom, when the Prime Minister had taken the decision not to suspend the functioning of Parliament, immediately their judiciary had taken up the case and they had come out with the judgments in exactly 20 days. In India, you can imagine how many years would it take. Give the example of Ram Janmabhoomi case, which has been lingering on for more than 70 years. Give the recent example of Article 370, which the judiciary is not even willing to take up also now. That is where you talk about efficiency. How to make them efficient, as we have said, fix a time period for judiciary to come out with the judgments. And the third thing, as we discussed in the class also, you must have all India judicial service, so that their promotions and everything is based on efficiency. And fourth thing is that we are continuing with this colonial practice of judiciary taking up so many holidays. During the summer time, during the British times, judges could not stay back in India because of extreme severe heat. So they would take off for almost 2 months during the summer time, which we continue even now. Our judiciary out of 365 days only functions for around 170 days. So how can they improve their efficiency? And that is what you have to talk about, all these things as part of reforms. And all these things, as you can see, all these things are there in our notes also. Various commissions have reiterated the crucial role of the governor in the Indian system of governance. But the successive governments have not heeded to make governor's office a political. Examine the examples. This is what we kept on saying in the class. Right from a Sarkaria Commission which was appointed in 1983, which submitted its report in 1988 onwards. We had so many commissions and committees which suggested that the entire politicization of office of governor is due to two important problems related to it. One is appointment, second one is removal. And these commissions, Sarkari Commission, Punji Commission, Supreme Court judgment in Bihar Assembly dissolution case, Supreme Court judgment in SR Bommai case, Supreme Court judgment in appointment and removal of a governor's case. They kept on recommending that the governor should be appointed. Who should be appointed? The person should be a political person. The person should not have actively participated in politics in recent times. The person should not be the same state from which for which he is going to be appointed as governor. And the person should not be again entering into active politics after his term is over. But none of the central governments have implemented any of these recommendations. You give the example. Even now also recently the central government has appointed governors to many states. All of them were mostly active politicians of ruling political party. Whichever political party that is in power, whether it is Congress or BJP, they only appoint active politicians as governors. This governor's office is being used to satisfy politically unemployed people in the ruling political party. Whenever the government finds that some of their senior leaders have become in a hurdle, they are appointed as governors. Similarly, whenever opposition party is in power at the state level, to reduce the effectiveness of the chief minister of opposition party, very controversial politician is being appointed as governors. He gave the examples of all the governors, whether it is this Karnataka governor, Bengal governor, Goa governor, or other states where governors have deliberately created problems. What is the solution? The solution cannot be found in these commissions, reports and recommendations. The solution can be found only when we create awareness among the people, or we must amend the constitution. Amend the constitution related to, in articles related to governor. Then only we can find. Will the constitution be amended? No, because political parties have a vested interest in appointing their own people as governors. So you have to create awareness among the people. We have to move towards a political culture based on cognitions. Next, Article 356 says, very much like the proverbial bolt from the blue, without giving an opportunity or notices to the state governments to correct its alleged shortcoming. This phenomenon not only undermines the autonomy of the state government, but also demeans the statute of the President of India, critically analyzed. As we discussed in the class also, Article 356 is one question that can definitely be asked this year, and it has been asked also. Why? Because of the misuse of Article 356 in recent times. So how do you start your answer? You start your answer with why Article 356 has been included in the Constitution. As Dr. Ambedkar has said, in Article 3, he wanted Article 356 to be a dead letter in our Constitution. That means it should never be used. It has been included with the objective of protecting the unity and integrity of the nation. If any state government, performs its functions in violation of the Constitution, in violation of the unity and integrity of the nation, then Article 356 can be imposed. Otherwise, it should remain a dead letter. But unfortunately, our constitutional forefathers did not give, as I said, as we keep on saying, our constitutional forefathers did not give too much importance to this article. Why? Because when the Constitution was framed, it was based on the assumption that Congress party would be in power forever, both at the center as well as in the states. So that is the reason why they could never imagine a situation wherein Article 356 is being misused. That is the reason why the article has been framed in a very highly ambiguous manner, which gives a huge amount of discretionary powers to the central government to dismiss the state governments ruled by opposition parties. Till 1967, it has not been used, but from 1967 onwards, as pointed out by Sarkara Commission, between 1967 and 1988, it was used for more than 100 times, and most of the time it was used only to benefit the ruling political party at the center. And after the emergence of coalition governments in 1990s onwards, we thought that misuse of Article 356 would come down, but it has not come down. Why? Because of the unholy alliances at the central level. So any alliance that comes to power at the central level would always target the state governments which are ruled by opposition parties. When Congress was in power, they have done the same to the BJP ruled states, and when BJP came to power, they have done the same to opposition ruled states. So now, as I said, what is the solution? The solution, as we keep on saying, is very, very simple, which is given by Sarkara Commission, which has been talked about by Supreme Court judgment in SR Bommai case, and which has been again given by Supreme Court in its judgment on Bihar Assembly dissolution case. That is what you have to write all those solutions. Basically, the strength of a political party should be tested only on the floor of the house, but not in the Raj Bhavans. Raj Bhavan should not become the center of activity. The office of governor should be completely apolitical one. For that, you must ensure non-political functioning of the governors also. It should start from appointment and removal of governors. And then, like in the case of Bihar Assembly dissolution case 2005, governor's report need not be the basis of for imposing Article 356. The central government should independently verify. And more importantly, the president plays a very crucial role here. President must use his discretionary powers, which has been given to him under 44th Amendment to the Constitution, suspensive veto. And of course, judiciary also has become nowadays very active. Judicial activism also has reduced the misuse of Article 356. But the problem with the judiciary is that the role of judiciary is what you call post-mortem in nature. Judiciary will come into picture only after the event takes place. So we need more proactive mechanism in the form of depoliticization of the office of governor, and also in the form of presidential activism. And you can include other recommendations of Sarkar Commission, Punji Commission, as well as Supreme Court judgments. Next, public sector undertakings were expected to take the Indian economy to the commanding heights. Instead, the successive governments have been pushing for disinvestment. Critically examine how the scenario has changed over the years. Again, while discussing PSUs in our class, I said that this year definitely the disinvestment will come, because it has not come for a long period of time, and it has come for not 1 or 2, 20 marks. So, you start your answer with again, why public sector enterprise had come into existence in the first place. From the second 5-year plan onwards, we opted for investment-led growth model, what we called it as Nehru Mehelnabis model, wherein we identified that public sector enterprises would be the engines of growth. So, in 1955, we had 5 public sector enterprises, with 29 crores of investment. By 1990, we had more than 242 public sector enterprises with more than 1.25 lakh crores of investment. We have seen huge amount of expansion in public sector enterprises. In 1970s, Indira Gandhi, as part of her Garibi Hatao and ultra leftist policies, what Indira Gandhi has done, she has nationalized many loss-making private sector enterprises. Loss-making private sector enterprises were nationalized in the name of protecting the interests of workers, which continued to be loss-making even after they were nationalized, in spite of the fact that they performed under monopolistic conditions. So after 1991, when in 1991 Indian economy collapsed, which forced us to introduce this liberalization, privatization and globalization. As part of this, as part of privatization, we have opted for 2 different formats. One is strategic sale, complete transfer of ownership. Second one is partial privatization in the form of disinvestment. And the question is about disinvestment. As again we have discussed in the class, this disinvestment process has not been successful of late. In the first 20 years, we could raise only 50,000 crores of rupees through disinvestment because of political compulsions. Between 2004 and 2009, we could not raise even a single rupee through disinvestment because of compulsions of coalition politics. And we had come out with certain objectives related to disinvestment. What are those objectives? The money which has been raised through disinvestment would be used to finance the capital expenditure. It would be used to modernize the public sector undertakings. It would be used for welfareist purposes, to improve infrastructure. But none of these objectives were realized. And when BJP came to power, the Department of Disinvestment was renamed as DIPAM. BJP government, the only thing they have done is they kept on changing the names. It was called Department of Investment and Public Sector, Public Asset Management. It was not investment, it was disinvestment. But they called it as investment. Department of Investment and Public Asset Management. It is called DIPAM. And the government has said that whatever the money they would be raising through disinvestment would be used basically for capital and infrastructure purposes. But in reality, it has been used only to finance the fiscal deficits of the government. Initially, yes, the government could not raise money through disinvestment because of the flawed process of disinvestment. Government had kept a huge amount of price for disinvestment, which has not been accepted by the markets. When the government could not get the price it demanded from the markets, the government through backdoor opted for disinvestment. They have asked the Life Insurance Corporation (LIC) to buy the shares of other public sector enterprises and transfer the money to the government. One public sector enterprise purchasing the shares of other public sector enterprises and transferring the money to the government, so that the government would be able to decorate its budgets to show to the rest of the world that it has reached the targets of fiscal deficit it had set for itself. But none of the objectives of disinvestment were realized. On the other hand, the critics have said that this disinvestment in public sector enterprises is nothing but selling family gold, to raise money for your day-to-day consumption expenditure, either from the supply side as well as the demand side. This investment process has been a failure. Then you talk about what should be done. All the things that we have mentioned in the class, what should be done. Government should come out with a clear-cut policy regarding disinvestment. Second thing is that disinvestment cannot be a one-time activity, it should be a continuous process. It should be a continuous process. The money raised by the government through disinvestment it should be put in a separate fund so that the money would not be misused to finance only fiscal deficits of the government. Fourth, the money raised through disinvestment should be used to modernize the public sector enterprises, so that these public sector enterprises would become much more competitive in nature. And fifth, there should be complete transparency regarding the whole process, so that the government should not be disinvesting through backdoor. The government cannot be asking one public sector enterprise, for example, ONGC, which had huge amount of cash reserves, more than 40,000 crores of rupees. ONGC was asked to buy the shares of Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation. This Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation was incurring huge amount of losses. The government wanted to disinvest it and nobody wants to buy it. ONGC had to shell 10,000 crores of rupees to buy this shares of this loss-making company. That cannot be done in the name of disinvestment. ONGC at present has very less cash reserves. From 14,000 crores of rupees, it has now only few hundred crores of cash surplus. This cannot be called disinvestment. So these are the things which you have to write for this question. Emerging development aspirations of the society necessitate the constitutional amendment to change the present safeguards available to the civil servants. Evaluate the pros and cons of such amendment. This is what we study as part of civil services reforms. Second Administrative Reforms Commission, it has said that India is the only country in the world wherein the agents of the state are more powerful than the state itself. This is what your beginning statement should be. It has said that India is the only country in the world wherein the agents of the state, that is civil servants, are more powerful than the state itself. Why? Because 1919 Government of India Act has given unprecedented protection to civil servants. Once they are appointed, it is almost impossible for the government to remove them from their service, howsoever inefficient they may be. Why? Because all these legislations were passed during the colonial times, wherein the Britishers wanted to make sure that civil servants would never be made accountable to the people for their performance. They wanted to make sure that the civil servants, and they wanted to make sure that the civil servants are given this stability of tenure. So second ERC, while discussing about this issue, has said that if the choice is between security of tenure versus accountability of civil servants, there is no choice at all. Importance should always be given to accountability of civil servants, and that is in that scenario we talk about amending the constitution. Second ERC had come out with a very radical suggestions. It has said that Article 309, Article 310 should be removed from the constitution because they provide security to civil servants. Once they are appointed, they cannot be removed by any authority which is lower in hierarchy than the one which has appointed them. They are appointed by the president, and they cannot be removed by any authority which is lower than the president, and president does not have any real powers, and there is no one above president. So obviously they enjoy complete security of tenure at the cost of accountability to civil servants. That is what the question says. Emerging development aspirations of the society necessitates the constitutional amendment to change the present safeguards available to the civil servants. So it has suggested that Article 309, 310 should be removed, and what are the safeguards that are needed should be included in Article 311 of the Constitution. What are the safeguards that are needed to protect honest civil servants? And then recently the government also talked about those things. Those civil servants whose performance is not up to the mark should be removed from their services for inefficiency. Till now, the government has removed most of the civil servants because of corruption, but not because of inefficiency. Since independence, not even a single civil servant has been removed from the service because of inefficiency. There have been, even recently also you can see, the government has removed so many of them, income tax officers, customs officers. They were removed because of corruption, not because of inefficiency. And some of the police officers were removed because of violating the code of conduct, but not for inefficiency. So there must be objective performance evaluation, which should be the basis of their removal, as suggested by Surendranath committee also, which we shall be discussing in other questions also. This is what you have to write for this question. Next, strong PMO is antithesis to the feature of collective responsibility of Council of Ministers. Examine the statement in relation to the position of PMO vis-a-vis Council of Ministers in the light of the statement. And exactly the same statement you can see in our class notes also. Those who have attended our classes, exactly the same statement we have made in the class. Strong PMO is antithesis to this Council of Ministers form of government, right? So we have discussed how this PMO has functioned right from the days of Jawaharlal Nehru. You have to talk about from Jawaharlal Nehru till now. As and when the Prime Minister had become powerful, automatically it resulted in dictatorship of PMO. Especially during the time of Indira Gandhi, P.N. Haksar was the most powerful bureaucrat in the country, and later P.C. Alexander, he was the most powerful bureaucrat in the country. And during the time of Rajiv Gandhi, PMO consisted of technocrats. All those technocrats, Manishankar Iyer, who was from IFS, who retired, and then Montek Singh Ahluwalia and Sam Pitroda. They were the people extremely powerful, and they dominated the functioning of all the ministries. And similarly, when P.V. Narasimha Rao, after 1993, when he won the no confidence motion from 1993 to 1996, again the country witnessed what you call prime ministerial form of government. P.V.R.K. Prasad, IAS officer from AP cadre, was the most powerful bureaucrat in PMO at that point of time. And PMO was involved in these filing cases against political opponents in what is popularly known as Jain Hawala case. And then during the tenure of Vajpayee, for the first time PMO was headed by a non-IAS officer. This foreign service officer, he was the most powerful person in the PMO, who went on to become the first NSA also, National Security Advisor. And then during the tenure of Manmohan Singh, PMO again was has expanded in terms of its size, and it was these officers from Kerala cadre who dominated PMO, and it had become extremely controversial because of inefficient functioning of PMO. In 2014, when the country witnessed for the first time again a single party rule after 30 years, again we have witnessed the dictatorship of PMO. As recently as 3-4 months back also, PMO had written letters to all the ministries and departments saying that they should not announce any policies, any policy related to their ministries and departments without getting the approval from PMO. And PMO directly monitors the implementation of flagship schemes of all the ministries and departments. So ministries and departments, they don't have either freedom in formulating the policies, implementing the policies, or evaluating the policies. As the question that was asked last year also related to state governments, the ministers, the cabinet ministers have become nothing but secretaries in their own ministry, as they do not have any real freedom. As we say, a strong PMO is a salvation for any Prime Minister, but it is completely against the collective responsibility of parliamentary democracy. It results in dictatorship of a PMO. And what is the solution? As we have suggested, the solution is that a strong PMO can be there, but at the same time, PMO should not enter into what we call political functions. As rightly pointed out by Jawaharlal Nehru, PMO should remain the back office of the Prime Minister. It should never take up a political role. It should remain the back office of Prime Minister, and as part of Council of Ministers form of government, ministers should be given independence so that the PMO strictly performs what we call staff related functions. That is what you have to write for this question. Next, capacity issues relating to employees have hampered the implementation of several government programs. Trace the reasons in the context of provisions of national training policy. Basically, what we have said is that we keep on saying is that in paper 1, while talking about risks, we talk about the relationship between development administration and administrative development. That is where you have to start your answer. What did Fredericks say? Fredericks has said that administrative development is necessary to realize the objectives of development administration. Administrative development is necessary to realize the objectives of development administration. So what does development administration involves? Development administration involves formulating policies, programs, allocation of finances, creating structures, recruiting people, providing training to them, implementation, evaluation, feedback. This is what we say development administration. And one of the key components of development administration is administrative development. And this administrative development means enhancing the productive capacities of administrators so that they could realize the objectives of development administration. And this is what the question talks about. In India, most of the developmental and welfare schemes have been a failure because of lack of capacity building initiatives on the part of the government to make civil servants capable of performing the task of ensuring the success of development administration. So what should be done? This national training policy in 2012, what should be done? So basically, the same thing which we have discussed as part of training. It should focus on 3 important aspects. One is improving skills. Second one is gaining knowledge. And the third one is most important, developing values. Improving skills, gaining knowledge, developing values. What are the basic weakness of our training, civil services training? Our civil servants are trained only to perform regulatory functions. The training that is given to them as part of foundation course training, FCT, this foundation course training is for around 19 months. And the training mostly focuses only on performing regulatory functions, land revenue, and then police, maintenance of law and order, and settling the disputes related to land and everything, civilian disputes. It never emphasizes on developmental role of civil servants. It never emphasizes on development role. And these regulatory functions require, as we always say, value neutrality. They require value neutrality. That is the reason why Britishers focused on this concept of value neutrality as part of training of civil servants. Britishers focused only value neutrality. They said that civil servants are instruments. As instruments, they should not have any values. As instruments, they should not have any values. That is the reason why when they were asked to perform developmental functions, they are a complete failure. National Training Policy 1996 as well as the National Training Policy 2012 focused on these aspects. Unfortunately, National Training Policy 1996 was not implemented. That is the reason why again National Training Policy 2012 had come up. So this National Training Policy 2012 like 1996 focused on these three things. As I said, developmental role requires different kinds of skills compared to regulatory functions. Different kinds of skills. What are the skills that are required if you have to perform developmental functions? Again, you have to bring in the thinkers here. Chester Bernard, as we discussed in the paper 1, what are the leadership skills that you must possess? You must possess the skills of communication. You must possess the skills of motivation. You must possess the skills of resolving disputes. You must possess the skills of working with a group. These kind of skills are required. Why? Because as we study, public administration require completely different skills compared to that of private organizations. That is the reason why the basic problem with lateral entry is that when people from private sector come into administration, it becomes difficult for them to adjust to the complexities of administration, because administration requires different kinds of skills. You are implementing a developmental scheme, you must understand the social problems of that particular place. You have to motivate the people. You have to change the opinion of the people in favor of the government. You have to ensure active participation of people. You have to create awareness among the people. That is the reason why the kind of skills that are required is completely different from regulatory functions. Unfortunately, the training of civil servants does not focus on improving these kind of skills. Whereas in case of regulatory functions, what are the skills that are needed? Basically, strictly following the rules and regulations. They must have good knowledge about the civil laws, criminal laws. They must have good knowledge about writing notes on files. They must have good knowledge about following the rules and regulations, hierarchy. Nothing else is required, regulatory functions. Whereas the developmental functions require huge amount of skills. Similarly, knowledge. What our civil servants lack is practical knowledge. They simply don't have practical knowledge. Why? Because when you get into IAS, you have not seen, you have not seen at all the real, what is called the real world. You are from IITs and IIMs. Immediately you take examination, you get into services. You have take mathematics optional. You don't know what is unemployment. You don't know what is untouchability. You don't know what is poverty. You don't know what are the problems of agriculture. You talk to any of those IAS officer and ask them what is the difference between paddy and rice. 99.99% would not tell you what is the difference between paddy and rice. And they are the ones who are expected to implement all the agriculture related schemes of the government. They don't know what are kharif crops and what are rabi crops. Because the training mostly focuses on theoretical aspects. They are not given any training related to practical aspects of administration. That is the reason why field level training is important. Unfortunately, even field level training also, they'll be getting training at a very high level. The difference between police and IAS training is that in police training, as part of your training, you will be working as a SHO. You will be working in the police station officer, IPS. Whereas when you go to IAS training, you will be working as assistant collector. Your designation will be assistant collector. That means topmost position in the district collectorate. So, do you know the problems of people at the ground level? Obviously not. That is the reason why training should be focusing more on practical aspects, which is not at all being done in civil servants. Let them work at the ground level. Let them work at as a village assistants starting with, so that they will go to villages, know about the problems at the ground level. That is what training should be focusing on. On the other hand, if you sit in the collectorate office, how do you know about the problems of the people? That is what again national training policy focuses on. And third one is, most important one is values. Most importantly, values. That is what we keep on saying. During the British times, Britishers deliberately inculcated colonial attitudes so that the civil servants would become instruments of exploitation of the British Empire. And unfortunately, after independence, even after 70 years, we continue with the same training methods. That is what we call ivory tower approach. They sit on the top of the top tier of the building. From there, when you look at the people, you will never come to know about what exactly the problems faced by the people, because you lose so much touch with the people, the ordinary people, that you will never be able to empathize with their problems. Our training is conspicuous by its absence of values, sensitivity training. And most importantly, as we study all the time, training is always considered a paid holiday. In service training as well as induction training. Induction training is considered paid holiday because even before you go to the training institutions, your cadre, your service, everything is decided. So whatever may be your performance in the training, it will have no impact on your career. In service training, as we study, basically in service training is given to wrong people for wrong reasons. Honest IAS officer is there. You want to remove him from that position. You give promotion to him and he will say that to get that promotion, you must undergo training. You want to remove honest officers who are working in the field. And this in-service training is not compulsory. It is not mandatory. And performance during training is not linked to promotion. That is what National Training Policy talks about it. Especially in in-service training, make sure that the performance during training period it should be the basis of a promotion. So all these things which you have to write. Next, the strategy to deal with the non-performing assets of banks may lead to overburdened taxpayers. Examine the role of government to protect the interests of both. So, what is the strategy by the government to deal with non-performing assets of the banks? What is the strategy of the government to deal with non-performing assets of the banks? What is the strategy adopted by the government? The only strategy adopted by the government is writing of loans, recapitalization of banks. Recapitalization of banks. As and when NPAs are very high, what did the governments do? The banks will write off the loans. Second, the central government provide more funds to the banks so that their balance sheets are look more attractive. Recapitalization. Even very recently also, in this year's budget also, the government has said that they will provide 70,000 crores of rupees to banks. So now, this is what economic survey talked about. It talks about 4 R's, for reforming the banking system. What are the 4 R's that economic survey talked about? Recognition, then reform, okay, recapitalization, then as I always say, you need very good knowledge of economy. In the class also we talked about all these things. What is the last one? Restructuring. And what did the government do? It only recapitalized. Recapitalization. And where does the money come from? In the last 6 years or so, the government had spent, take out this year 70,000 crores, the government had spent around 2.5 lakh crores of rupees to recapitalize public sector banks. After putting money in the banks, the government says that NPAs are coming down. What nonsense is this? Right? Taxpayers' money is used to finance the corrupt practices of banks, public sector banks. That is what the government is doing. That is what exactly the question says. Obviously, the government has not talked about any of these things. It has not. What is the basic problem with public sector banks? Basic problem with public sector banks. What is the basic problem with public sector banks? In 1969 and in 1980, in 1969, 14 banks were nationalized, 1986 banks were nationalized. by Indira Gandhi government in the name of socialism. And that is where the seeds of corruption were sown. In the name of socialism, public sector banks were nationalized. And what did they do? Once these public sector banks were nationalized, the ruling political party has appointed its own people as chairman and directors of these banks. And who were given the loans? Loans were given to only ruling political party members. And obviously those loans would turn out to be what? NPAs, non-performing assets. They would never repay. This is what we call it as systematic corruption, unholy nexus between political executive, bureaucracy and businessmen. The loans were given and there is complete secrecy in the whole functioning of banking sector. Complete secrecy. The government would never let ordinary people who have taken the loans also. And as and when the crisis become much more severe, the government would take taxpayers' money to finance these loss-making public sector enterprises. Taxpayers' money. Obviously, that is what the government calls it as reform. Government calls recapitalization as reform. Recapitalization is not reform. You are taking poor people's money. You are taking poor people money to finance the corrupt deeds of rich, unscrupulous businessmen and politicians. The government will never tell us whose loans have been written off by the banks. When the Supreme Court had asked the RBI governor, Raghuram Rajan, why don't you name the defaulters list public? RBI governor Raghuram Rajan, for whatever the good he is, he replied that if the RBI reveals the names of defaulters, people would lose faith in the banking system. He does not want the system to collapse. Why? Because who had taken the loans? Mostly politicians and their cronies, what we call as crony capitalism. Instead of reforming the system, the government has taken the easy way out of even recently also as part of reforms, our finance minister boldly declared, she declared that the government would be infusing more capital into public sector banks. That is not the solution. The solution is professionalization of banking system as suggested by economic survey. First you must differentiate between the ownership and management. Ownership can be in the hands of the government, management should be in the hands of professionals. You must ensure complete transparency in the functioning of a banking system. And another suggestion that has been given is privatized banks. Why do you require government banks? You require only one bank. Why do you require hundreds of banks? Privatized banks. On the other hand, what is the solution the government has come out with? Merger of banks. Does merger of banks change the situation? No. With merger of banks, the government believes that efficient bank, if it is merged with the inefficient bank can become efficient. But what happens in reality? So for this, there is this very popular joke. George Bernard Shaw, very intelligent person. Once a Hollywood actress had come, and she said that let us marry, so that our children will have your intelligence and my beauty. That is what she said. Bernard Shaw had said, what if they have my beauty and your intelligence? The same thing will happen with merger of banks. I don't know why nobody tells these things to our finance minister. So that is where the problem, that is not reform. Merger of banks is not reform. What will happen? Inefficient banks will become more inefficient. Efficient banks automatically will become inefficient because bad spreads much more faster than good. The government believes that a good work culture of efficient banks would reform bad banks, but that will not be the case. Let us someone go and tell our finance minister about George Bernard Shaw, and that is what she has done. So this is not the solution. Privatized banks. Why do you require banks? Imagine 70,000 crores of rupees being spent on schemes like providing quality education to children, on improving health facilities in a state like Bihar. That is where the government should be talking about. But The government never think of these kind of reforms, because as we keep on saying, what really, as we discussed the other day as part of paper 1, what is governance in the age of globalization? It is all about protecting the interests of multinational companies. That is what. For example, Mukesh Ambani has loans worth more than 1 lakh crores of rupees with public sector banks. He would never repay them also. Nobody can ask also. After some point of time, they will be called NPAs. And Mukesh Ambani will become richest person in the world. Why? Because nobody knows how much amount of loans have taken by him, how much amount of money he has repaid. Because nothing will be made public. Transparency. That is what is required. Next, of course, whenever people talk about these things, our government is always there to talk about Balakot, Pulwama, nationalism. And of course, if you still talk about these things, Sedition Act is always there. So that is where the problem. Considerable attention, for example, coming, you have elections in Maharashtra. There is so much of corruption in the entire banking system, they are cooperative banks and they have collapsed. Will that influence the electoral outcome? Never. BJP again will come back to power. Why? Because these cooperative banks are held by either BJP or NCP. If anyone comes to power, who will benefit? Only these corrupt cooperative banks. RBI says that they don't have any control. Government says that we don't want to control. Okay. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Restructuring. Restructuring in terms of, as I said, privatizing, completely loss-making public sector banks, and then, other thing as we have said, differentiating from ownership and management, separating ownership from management. Next, considerable attention has been paid to the restructuring of administrative systems at the local and central levels, but very few reforms have been undertaken at the state level. That is what we say. The basic problem with our entire reform process since 1991 has been that, we focused only on reforms at the central and local levels. Union, state and local self governments. In 1991, economic reforms focused on reforms at the central level. And then these 1992, 73rd, 74th amendments focused on reforms at the local level. But the crucial reforms, one of the important reasons why economic reforms in India have been a failure is because of the failure to implement reforms at the state level. Why the country is not able to attract FDI the way China is attracting? Why? Because the FDI proposals, they are ratified at the central level, but the implementation will have to take place at the state level. Everything is in the state list. As one of the chief ministers in 1980s, N.T. Ramarao, while talking about the central government, he said that the center is a myth. In our day-to-day life, do we see central government? Law and order, state. Land administration, state. Agriculture, state. Forest, state. Then drinking water, state government. Electricity, state. Where do you see center? In our day-to-day life, where do we see central government? So, where do you see central government in our day-to-day life? What are the things that we are concerned with our day-to-day life? Caste registration, certification, everything. It has to be done by the state government only. Where do we central government in our day-to-day life? Do we? That is the reason why he made this statement, very popular statement, which is being quoted even now. Center is a myth. Central government is a myth. What does the Prime Minister do? What are the activities done by the PMO, Cabinet Secretariat and Central Secretariat, which impact our day-to-day life? When Prime Minister goes to America, does it impact my day-to-day life? When he addresses people in Houston, will it impact my day-to-day life? So obviously not. The center is a myth, and that is where the problem is. We have implemented At present, after BJP came to power in the last 5 years, the general talk among the people is that corruption might have come down at the central level because of centralization of power in the hands of PMO. But the problem is that the corruption that takes place at the state level is yet to come down. There is huge amount of corruption even at the state level. Because everything, our day-to-day life is always related to the state government. All the state government departments, education, health, everything is in the hands of the state government. What is there with the central government which impacts our day-to-day life? External affairs. Does it impact our day-to-day life? As I said, if the Prime Minister goes to America or France, how does it really matter to me? For a person on the street, does it matter to me? Will that reduce corruption in my secretariat? Will it reduce corruption in my district administration? Obviously not. In FDA proposals, as I said, the permission is given at the central level. Who has to give actual permission at the ground level? State government has to give you permission for land. State government has to give, provide you infrastructure. State government has to give you enough security, and that is the reason why we could not benefit out of this economic. And at the local level, local self-governments, the 73rd, 74th amendments, as we keep on studying, they are implemented only in letter but never in spirit. So obviously, these local governments have also not been successful because of unwillingness on the part of the state governments to transfer power to local self-governments, functions, functionaries, and finances. And that is the reason why India is not able to progress rapidly. We are not able to progress. For example, these state governments, even after liberalization also, you can see those states which were poor before liberalization remained poor after liberalization also because of a governance deficit at the state level. They could not benefit out of liberalization, globalization. States like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Bengal, Jharkhand, they could not benefit because of poor governance at the state level, as this year's economic survey points out. You take any developmental welfare scheme, all the benefits are going to those states which are already developed. Why? Because we have not implemented reforms at the state level. The reforms at the state level unfortunately missed the attention of our policy makers. Now, what is the problem here? Who has to implement the reforms? State governments. Will they implement the reforms? Obviously not. Can the central government impose reforms on the state governments? For example, if you look at this, one of the terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission, it says that the state governments will be given funds only when they perform well on flagship schemes. State governments have asked the central government, who are you? We are a federal country. Who are you to decide what is a flagship scheme and what is the performance criteria? In a federal country, we are the ones who will decide. Your job is only to give us money and forget about it. Now, one of the criticisms against 14th Finance Commission is that, it has resulted in decentralization and democratization of corruption. Why corruption had come down at the central level? Why? Because at the central level not much money is there, because most of the money is flowing into the state governments only. Whatever the money that the central government is also earning, most of the money will be given to the state governments as part of centrally sponsored schemes or central sector schemes. The central government is spending money exclusively only on defense, external affairs. The rest of the money will be given to the state governments only. And after 14th Finance Commission, state governments have got huge amount of funds without any accountability, resulting in what you call decentralization and sarcastically democratization of corruption. That is what happened. Why we have not implemented the reforms? None of the state governments have really bothered to come out with state finance commissions. All the questions were asked in the section B also. While answering this question, you will be answering all the questions of section B also. None of the state governments really bothered to come out with state finance commissions. None of the state governments have really bothered to set up this DPCs, district planning committees. None of the state governments have really bothered to implement outcome budgets. And most of the state governments, what they have done, they have found out different ways of overcoming this FRBM legislation. What they are doing is that state governments are not taking loans. If the state governments take loans, it will come under the FRBM. What they are doing is that they are asking their public sector enterprises to take loans. The loans taken by the state public sector enterprises will not be part of the FRBM. So public sector enterprises are taking loans. And if you look at combine the public sector loans taken by public sector enterprises and the state governments combined together, their fiscal deficit will be minimum 8 to 10%. They are manipulating the accounts. None of the state budgets provide a clear, true picture about the financial health of the state government. Because most of the state government never really bother to present budgets on time also. And as far as the state assemblies are concerned, these assemblies have become completely non-functional. Last year, Punjab State Assembly functioned only for 11 days. On an average, every state assembly, the number of days the assembly functions is only around 20 days. Nobody is bothered. And the same in the state governments, the same law has been given assent by the governor for 25 years before it being tabled on the floor of the house. What it is called? Ordinance Raj. Even the state governments have majority on the floor of the house, they never really bother to introduce the legislation on the floor of the house. They always take the route of ordinances. Every year, in the last 5 years, this Telangana state government has issued around 11,000 ordinances which are secretive, which are never put on the websites. This is what every state government does. And the state governments, especially with the powerful chief ministers, they have become dictators. They have become dictators. And they are taking loans left, right and center. They are taking loans left, right and center. As I said, to overcome the FRBM legislation, they are asking their public sector enterprises to take loans. The money is diverted because budgets are not never presented on time, and budgets never provide details about the expenditure of the government. There is absolutely no accountability at the state level. And all the state governments are using the provisions of constitution to indulge in misuse and abuse of power. They are asking the central government not to interfere. And none of the state governments really bother to implement what we call police reforms. Even the Supreme Court judgment in the Prakash Singh case, none of the state governments have really bothered to implement police reforms. And next thing we say that politicization of civil services is the worst at the state level. Wherein the bureaucrats display their political loyalties openly. They display their political loyalties openly. They openly join hands with the political executive at the state level. Politicization of civil services has been complete at the state level. And of course, as we have mentioned, state governments never really bothered to ensure what we call good governance. Why? Because every state government in India, especially 1999 onwards, they had realized the fact that it is very easy to win elections on the basis of what is called political populism. Political populism. Thanks to liberalization and globalization, thanks to this Finance Commission recommendations, state governments have huge amount of resources. And what they are doing, they are giving everything free of cost to the people. They realize the fact that political populism with the corruption, will ensure success. That is the formula. You bribe the voters at the time of elections, give them huge amount of money, and along with the charismatic leadership at the state level. Give the example of Bengal in this chit fund scam. All the ruling party politicians were actively involved. No action has been taken. Complete politicization. The DGP of the state himself was accused in the corruption scam, chit fund scam. If you take every state, the DGP invariably is corrupt, as pointed out by various commissions. And same is the case with chief secretary. No state government really bothered to implement civil services reforms. And that is where the problem is. And as I said, every state government completely ignored. In the recent past, in order to adhere to the FRBM, in order to adhere to the FRBM, recently these articles had come in the newspapers also about state finances. What every state government has done? Every state government is drastically reducing its capital expenditure. For example, give the example here. When the Uttar Pradesh state government implemented this loan waivers scheme for farmers, and it had cut down its capital budget, expenditure on infrastructure and capital by almost 70%. Why? Because lack of awareness among the citizens. You have to talk about all these things and then write the reforms. These questions are really, really good this year. Next, it is observed that non-functioning of district planning committees is preventing the convergence of rural and urban planning needs. Do you agree? Justify. As we have said and as we discussed in the class, DPC is one topic which is asked almost every year. So you have to talk about the structure of DPC, district planning committees first, and how this results in convergence of rural and urban needs. So what is the structure here? If you take in rural areas, the lowest level is Gram Sabha and Gram Panchayat. From here it will go to Mandal Panchayats or Mandal Parishads. From here it will go to Jilla Panchayats or Jilla Parishads. This is what is called decentralized planning. In urban areas, depending on the locality, it can be municipal corporations or municipal councils or Nagar Panchayats in a municipal corporation. And the elected members of both from rural as well as urban areas are part of what we call DPC. And 80% of members of DPC, 80% of members of DPC are from the elected members of rural and urban bodies, and remaining 20% are appointed by the state government, mostly experts. So that at the district level there is convergence between rural and urban planning. There is convergence between rural and urban planning. All these things we have discussed in the class. Now, what is the problem? The problem is, 1995 was the year when all the state governments have implemented 73rd and 74th amendments. Article 243 G talks about DPCs. 1995. We are in 2019. Out of 29 states we have, how many states have really bothered to set up DPCs? Only 14 states. Only 14 states have really bothered to set up DPCs. And these DPCs had come into existence only, to fulfill constitutional obligations. They have come into existence only to fulfill constitutional obligations. And most of the states, rest of the states never really bothered to set up DPCs also. And those states which have set up DPCs, these DPCs had become totally ineffective. Why? Because 3 F's, functions, functionaries and finances. These rural local self-governments as well as urban local self-governments are not given any either functions or functionaries or finances. These DPCs, as second ERC points out, they are there only in letter but never in spirit. That is where the problem. They are totally ineffective. That is what the question. Do you agree? Yes, justify with all these facts. Then you talk about what should be done. You talk about reforms in both 73rd as well as 74th amendment. Next, the police public interface is punctuated with distrust and fear. Again, the same statement we can see in our class notes also. The basic problem why community policing has been a failure, police reforms have been a failure, is because of the lack of trust between the police and ordinary citizens. The lack of trust. Why there is no trust? There is no mutual faith between police and ordinary citizens. Why? as Prakash Singh has pointed out in one of his recent articles also, still people in India believe police to be a colonial force which is there to protect and promote the interests of rich and powerful sections of society. During the British times, they worked for the colonial government, imperial government. After independence, they started working for the rulers. As we said, the only thing that had changed after independence was or is, white man's rule was replaced with brown man's rule. Otherwise, the same exploitation continues in the name of rule of law. In the name of democracy, same exploitation continues. And that is the reason why we say that police reforms have not been successful. For success of police reforms, what is required is continued faith between the police and people. People, as we say, as second RC says in its report on public order, every citizen is a police without uniform. They must also take equal responsibility for ensuring law and order. But what is the reason why ordinary citizens do not come forward and help the police? Why? Because as we said, especially poorer sections of society, they believe that police are there only to protect and promote. And another problem is that police have this kind of mentality, attitude, which they have developed as part of colonial police force. They always look ordinary people with lot of suspicion. During the British times, police were taught to look at ordinary people with lot of suspicion because police were working for imperial government. Ordinary citizens were fighting for freedom. That is the reason why there was a lot of suspicion, absence of faith. After independence also, India is the only country in the world, I repeat, India is the only country in the world wherein the state looks at its people with a lot of suspicion. Every person is treated as a criminal till he is proved as innocent. That is what the present state in India. Take the case of the recent amendments to Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA. The government declares you as a terrorist, then you have to prove that you are not. You are turning upside down the entire concept of justice. What does the concept of justice says? You are innocent till you are proved otherwise. But the government says that you are a terrorist and prove that you are not. The same thing with police also. When you are giving this colonial police force so much of power, can you expect a better police people relationship? So what are the reforms that we talk about here? Basically, you are talking about reforms in the structure, laws, rules, regulations, functioning of police forces. Everything should be completely changed. First and foremost, the term force should be replaced with service. Police are like a service, like revenue services, like judicial services, like banking services. Police should also be a service. We don't call it judicial force. We don't call civil force. We don't call it as banking force. Why only police force? Colonial, British. And no political party wants to implement police reforms. Why? Because any political party that comes to power, as we have discussed in the previous question also, state governments, they have completely escaped the whole reform process. Now you have to write about all these things. Next, the evidence suggests that the dream of deliberative democracy could not be realized in practice at the grassroots level. Evaluate the impediments in the functioning of Gram Sabha. The same thing as we kept on, we have discussed it so many times in the class. The same question is being repeated. What are the problems in implementing in the functioning of Gram Sabhas? First and foremost, population. What is the average size of Gram Sabha? 25,000 because of huge amount of population, density of population. Second one is non-participation of women. Third one is this social hierarchy, caste hierarchy, wherein scheduled castes and scheduled tribes are not allowed to attend the meetings of Gram Sabha along with forward castes. They will not be allowed. Next one is meetings of Gram Sabha are never held regularly. And next, all the decisions are taken by Gram Panchayats, without consulting or informing Gram Sabhas. And then next problem is, as we have said, illiteracy, backwardness on the part of the people. They simply don't know what is happening, lack of awareness. Then you talk about the solutions. All these things are there in our class notes. Next, RTA has started its journey, but is far from its destination. In the view of the statement, examine the present status. Again, the same statement you could see in our class notes. We have not, I did not do anything new. I have taken it from second ERC. I have copied it from second ERC and UPSC copied it from our notes. But only thing is, copying is our birthright. That's why we are amending fundamental rights also. Right to copy, we are including as part of Article 14. Right? So, again the same thing. RTA has started its journey, but is far from its destination. In view of the statement, examine the present status of RTA movement. So, what we have said is that, when we passed RTA Act in 2005, we embarked on a journey, whose outcome is unknown to the people at that point of time. But after almost 15 years of implementation of RTA, we know what could be the consequences of RTA, but that has come in the way of implementation of RTA. When the political executive realized that RTA can have disastrous consequences, like what the UPA government had realized when all the major scams of the government had become public due to the RTA petitions filed by activists, NGOs and others, then the government started taking corrective measures, including the recent amendment to the RTA bill. Successive governments have deliberately curtailed the powers of RTA. For example, the amendments made by the present government to Whistleblower Protection Act, wherein the protection has been completely removed to whistleblowers. And then the recent changes made by the government to take many institutions out of the purview of RTA. CBI has been taken out of RTA. Investigative agencies have been taken out of RTA. Government saying that they should not be under RTA. And this is where maximum amount of corruption. Of course, defense, army is not part of RTA, where maximum amount of corruption takes place. Similarly, Section 8 of RTA, and of course, Official Secrets Act. The question that was asked in your ethics paper this year also. As long as the Official Secrets Act is there, RTA can never be implemented. Official Secrets Act is antithesis to RTA. But the government does not want to remove Official Secrets Act. So you have to talk about all those things and come out with solutions. Next, the concept of a new localism arrangement may defeat the very purpose of local self-governance. Do you agree? Justify. What did we say about new localism? What is the most important part of new localism? The most important part of new localism is depoliticization of administration at the local level. If you remember, that is what is there in your notes. Depoliticization of administration at the local level. Why? Because as we studied, old localism that we have implemented resulted in politicization of development process at the local level. It only resulted in high levels of corruption. Old localism resulted in politicization and corruption. It resulted in unholy nexus between political executive and bureaucracy at the local level. And it only resulted in, as we said, it only resulted in emergence of a new political elite at the local level. Ordinary citizens could never participate. And that is the reason why this concept of new localism had emerged. Another problem with old localism was the policy conflict between the different types of government, union, state and local self-governments. Central government gives permission for FDI. State governments reject it. Local self-governments will ask what is FDI, and it is over. The story is over. That is where the problem is. All the FDI proposals have to be implemented at the ground level, wherein the local self-governments have huge amount of power. And that is the reason why we are talking about depoliticizing administration at the local level. The question says that the concept of new localism arrangement may defeat the very purpose of local self-governance. Do you agree? You say that definitely. Why? Because we have to move beyond, we have to move beyond politicization of development at the local level. That is the reason why at the local level also we are talking about multi-actor paradigm. We are talking about local self-governments. We are talking about bureaucracy. We are talking about NGOs. We are talking about civil society organizations. We are talking about self-help groups. We are talking about social audit committees. We are talking about beneficiary associations coming together to ensure governance at the local level. So obviously, we must, if we have to destroy, we must destroy local self-governments also, because they have become citadels of corruption. Take the case of urban areas. Give the example of BMC, Brahi Mumbai Municipal Corporation, Greater Bombay Municipal Corporation. It is full of corruption. Its annual budget runs into more thousands of crores of rupees. But look at the roads, look at the infrastructure. Why? Because of crony capitalism at the local level. So that is the reason why we must depoliticize governance at the local level. Let the people decide what kind of roads that they want. As the question that was asked last year also, neighborhood management is the solution. Let the people of the locality decide what kind of infrastructure they want, what kind of law and order facilities they want, what kind of education and health centers they want. Let them run those things rather than political executive or bureaucracy running those things. Decentralizing power, ensuring active participation of citizens. Definitely it should be done. If in the process you are reducing the power of local self-governments, so be it. We have to move towards what is called participatory democracy. Next, effective performance management system needs to precede taking dead wood out of from bureaucracy. Comment. This is what we studied. What a second year say, what Surendranath committee has recommended, as we studied as part of civil services reform. Surendranath committee, it has said that this confidential reports ACRs should be replaced with performance management and evaluation systems, PMS. PMS or PMES. And what should be the objective? The objective is to remove inefficient and corrupt bureaucrats. That is the reason why Surendranath Committee has suggested that if a bureaucrat fails to get a promotion for 3 successive terms, 3 successive times, then he should be removed. That means when you are not eligible to hold the current position, you will not be promoted. That is the idea behind promotions. On the basis of your performance in the present position, you will be given promotions. When you are not able to perform consistently well in the present position, that means you have become inefficient. You should be removed. That is what the performance management systems, their basic objective is to remove the dead wood from the bureaucracy. The problem is that these bureaucrats have to perform only till they get into services. Till you get into IAS, you have to work. Right? Even to get into IAS also, you don't have to work. You can get into IAS through different ways also. Take mathematics optional and score 400 marks. In GS, you don't have to score any marks also. Interview, give your interview in Hindi. Other person will be speaking in Bhojpuri. Both of you will be speaking. And you will get 220 marks in interview. Regional feelings. Right? And you will be there in IAS. And after that, for the next 35 years, as we say, what is the difference between political executive and bureaucracy? Once you are selecting a bureaucrat, he will be there for 35 years. Politician will be there only for 5 years. If Rahul Gandhi, not even 1 year also. He has already left the country. Right? But politicians, these bureaucrats will be there for 35 years. And you don't show any kind of creativity in recruitment. And you are not really concerned about their performance also. That is the reason why we have so much of dead wood. Today, I think Indian Express, Manish Sabarwal, I think he had written a beautiful article on civil services reforms. Just go through that one. Almost 90% of the questions that you can answer in this year's paper from his article only. He talked about all kinds of reforms. Just go through that one. You have to remove. If you look at performance evaluation of our civil servants, more than 95% of them will get outstanding grading, which is ridiculous. Outstanding means they always stand outside their offices. Okay? Right? And what kind of bureaucracy we have? In a inverse pyramid. Okay, at the top, in the central secretariat, at any point of time, you have 250 secretaries working in policy formulation. Nonsense, right? And do they come out with better policies? No. In the finance ministry, what are the policies they come out with? Recapitalization of banks. In any other country in the world, they will be hanged. India Gate is always there. Capital punishment. But in our country, they will be given promotions and they will be called secretaries. Right? For how long we continue with this dead wood? That is what the question is. Not more than 10% of bureaucrats should be getting outstanding grading. And those bureaucrats, as suggested by Surinan committee, those bureaucrats who consistently fail consecutively for 3 terms should be immediately removed, automatically removed. Till now, as I said, since independence till now, not even a single bureaucrat has been removed because of inefficiency. That means all of them are efficient. That is where the problem, that is what the question says. Next, all-weather rural connectivity scheme to even unconnected rural habitation has the potential to transform the rural economy. Do you agree? Definitely. That is what, as someone has said, one economist, popular economist some time back commented. He said that if you have money, construct roads. If you have more money, construct more roads, nothing else. Don't do anything else. Construct roads. If you have more money, construct more roads. Because this can transform the entire economy. This can transform the entire economy. Give the example here. And these are things which you study in your agriculture, Indian economy. 90% of these vegetables, fruits do not reach markets because we don't have any proper transportation facilities. And if you look at, forget about rural areas. Okay, if you consider Patna as rural area, then it is fine. You have the right to consider also. And recently what happened in Patna? Okay. Right now what happened? 5 feet water. And people are using submarines. That is where the problem is. If this is the plight of what you call the capital, capital with a capital C, right? You can imagine about other areas. Why this infrastructure is so much important? Why it is very, very important? I said that this connectivity, when you're talking about connectivity, we are not only talking about roads. We are talking about communication. For example, you are a farmer, you are a vegetable farmer, who produce vegetables. If you know that in the mandi, in the market next to your village, they are offering better price. Through connectivity, you will know. Immediately, you will take your and you will get more price. In India, what is the basic problem is that the producers will never get the much needed attractive remuneration for their hard work. It is only the middleman. Why? Because these producers simply do not have any facilities. They do not have any means to maximize their gains. This is why you talk about connectivity, communication. You are talking about roads, communication, then electricity. This is also very, very important. Electricity. Then you require connectivity. You take in the form of warehouses and cold storage houses. Warehouses and cold storage houses. Then connectivity not only in terms of this, in terms of education also, because you need literate population also. Literate. If a farmer is a literate person, he can read and write. He can think about. He can talk about the latest developments in agriculture, which he can use also. Connectivity in terms of all these things. We are not only talking about roads. We are talking about all these things, and you can talk about drinking water, safe drinking water. So you must ensure connectivity to the rest of the world. The globalization is nothing but an interconnected world. When as part of globalization, you are talking about global village. What do you mean by global village? What is a global village? Wherein every person has access to other person. In a village, what you say, in a village, every person knows the other person because it's a small place. When you talk about global village, every person in the world has access to other person through different kinds of means. What we call it as connectivity. And that is what the question talks about it. So the government should think beyond, as I said, you look at the article today, the government now is talking about $5 trillion economy. And after that, the government says that by 2030, it should be $10 trillion economy. Are we ready for that $10 trillion economy? $10 trillion economy is nothing but fully connected economy. Rural areas should be completely connected to urban areas. Health should be connected to agriculture, education. Both of them should be connected to infrastructure, to transportation, to communication. Everything should be interconnected. Then only you can hope of a $10 trillion economy. Similarly, industry should be connected to agriculture. Academic institutions should be connected to professions. That is what you talk about, and which you have to write. Next, come to the next question. The office of the district collector has merely become a bureau for funneling government schemes, collecting statistics, and an officer in attendance for unending VIP duties. Critically examine its role in the light of recommendation of second ERC. Again, again the same statement had taken from our class notes. That is what we said. One of the important functions you perform after you become collector is, what is called it? What is the important function? Protocol functions. As I said, minister's third wife is coming. You have to go to the railway station. Illegal only, obviously. And morning 3 o'clock she is coming to the railway station. The cement bench is there. Half the bench is occupied the beggar. Remaining half by you. And if you are not there, as part of protocol functions, in 3:30 you will get a communication, WhatsApp message. You have been transferred to Dantewada. Dancing with tribals. Playing with Naxals. That is what, as we discussed, a district collector is responsible for everything that happens in the district, but is not accountable for anything. He is responsible for everything that happens. And that is where, Second Administrative Reforms Commission had come out with its recommendations, wherein it talked about changing role of district collector in the age of globalization and democratic decentralization. So what are the reforms that we have suggested? What are the reforms? Second ERC has said that district collector should perform only specific functions. But again, that recommendation was also not properly given. It has said that specific function means maintenance of law and order. Specific function means generation of revenue. A specific function means collecting revenue through sale of liquor, because that is the most important source of revenue for any government. Specific function means implementation of developmental schemes. Specific function means being a guide to local self-governments. It cannot be the case. Obviously, what we have suggested is that you have to separate regulatory functions from developmental functions. As we said, district collector is the example of what Ricks called it as a prismatic society in India, wherein a single structure performs multiple functions, which results in overlapping. That is the reason why district collectors mostly perform regulatory functions but often ignore developmental functions. And that is what also we said, district collector in India, the functioning of district collector in India is what we talked about in Herbert Simon, Gresham's law, working in the functioning of bureaucracy in India. Gresham's law. All these things you have to write, you have to link paper 1 and Indian administration. What is this Gresham's law? Bad money drives good money out of circulation. In the same manner, if you look at the functioning of district collector, these non-significant daily routine functions take up the entire time of district collector, leaving him with no time to think about developmental role. As I said, if you are going to railway station in the morning at 3 o'clock, which you have to do, Please don't think that after you become collector, you have all the things. You'll become a good watchman, night watchman. But the name is different. You are called district collector. You are not called night matter. You are not called night watchman. That is it. There are so many instances wherein the collectors have been transferred because they did not go and meet the cabinet minister who had come to the district, when he came to the district. Immediately they are transferred because all the cabinet ministers, in the state government, they always take it as a prestige issue. The district collector should come and receive them. The collector should accompany them wherever he goes, like that hutch dog. That is what they have to do. And they are 99%. They are all extremely busy doing nothing. Like you people, So that is what district collector is. That is the reason why second ERC has talked about, as we have said, there are two solutions here. Divide the functions into regulatory and developmental functions, or divide the district itself. Let the district have not more than 5 or 6 lakh of population. One assembly constituency can be converted into a district, so that a single person can perform all the functions, or else go for specialization even at the district level also. For example, all the developmental schemes, through the NPM, through new localism, give, let the private sector come and participate in implementation of developmental welfare schemes. That is what we study in urban local self-governments, council manager form of government. Let, like recommended by various commissions, let the Superintendent of Police take up the entire, activities related to law and order. Already the commissionerate, this form of government is introduced in the cities wherein the IAS officers simply don't have any role in law and order, wherein the police commissioner has all the powers. Let it be implemented at the district level also, so that the district collector will not be. Similarly, they let the conduct of elections be performed by someone else. Disaster management is a specialized activity. It should be given to specialists. Let us have more specialists and make district collector responsible only for some functions. And then second ERC talked about introducing e-governance, implementation of RTI. And second ERC also has said one more recommendation which we kept on talking about in the class also. The district collector's office should be converted into a secretariat organization at the district level. Like the state secretariat at the state level, district collector office should be also converted into district secretariat at the district level, with the district collector acting as chief secretary at the district level. All these recommendations which we have discussed in the class, all of them you have to write. Next, minimal accountability being the dominant norm in the political system, the Lokpal can only be an ideal institution with limited effectiveness. Explain. That is what we have said. If you remember again while talking about corruption in the class, one Lokpal, how so strong it may be, can never be effective. When Anna Hazare in 2011 started this movement for Lokpal, what happened? Nothing. Corruption remained the same. Even now the government has said that they are implementing Lokpal bill. Does it mean that corruption will come to an end? Obviously not. Howsoever strong the Lokpal may be, it can never be effective for the simple reason that corruption in India is systemic and systematic in nature. If you remember exactly the same statement we have made in the class. What is the basic feature of Indian political and administrative systems? Complete absence of accountability. As we said, we keep on saying, in the last 70 years, we are continuing with colonial structures. As the second ERC has rightly pointed out, the only thing that has changed is only, white man's rule is replaced with brown man's rule. 21st century India is still governed by 19th century rules and regulations. So you can come out with as many institutions you want. Lokpal will go in the same direction as that of CBI or CVC or Enforcement Directorate or other anti-corruption agencies. Why? Because the political executive does not want any kind of accountability. They don't want any kind of accountability for their actions. As we studied in corruption, why we have so much of corruption? corruption is equal to monopoly plus discretion plus secrecy minus accountability. Unless we reform this system, Lokpal can never be effective. What we are doing, we will be adding one more institution to fight corruption, which itself can become corrupt. Like CBI, Enforcement Directorate, or CVC. For example, the government had appointed Thomas as a CVC in 2011. The objective of CVC is to fight corruption. And whom you are appointing as CVC? A bureaucrat who was convicted of corruption. The same thing will happen, the same thing will happen with Lokpal also. The government knows how to reduce the effectiveness of institutions. So that is the reason why we say that if you have to fight corruption, multi-dimensional reforms should be implemented simultaneously. What are the multi-dimensional reforms? You talk about all the reforms: political reforms, electoral reforms, economic reforms, parliamentary reforms, police reforms, judicial reforms, financial sector reforms, and then civil services reforms, and budgetary reforms. You have to reform, you have to implement multi-dimensional reforms. That is what you have to write. Sevatham scheme had great potential to reform service delivery, but opportunities frittered away. Comment. As we have discussed again in the class, Sevatham, this is part of what we call citizen charters. The Sevatham scheme basically focuses on improving service delivery mechanisms by involving the beneficiaries, stakeholders. But like any other scheme of the government, as recently pointed out by Department of Administrative Reforms, Sevatham also has failed. Why it has failed? What are the reasons why these citizen charters and Sevatham schemes have failed? The reasons are the same. As pointed out by second ERC, all these reforms are implemented only in letter, but never in spirit. First and foremost, for the success of Sevatham scheme, you require three important ingredients. First one is involvement of citizens, which is not being done by the government. Second one is capacity building, that is improving the capabilities of administrators who are responsible for implementation of these schemes, who are responsible for ensuring efficient service delivery mechanisms. Third one is GRM, grievance redressal mechanisms. These GRMs are completely absent in India. That is what the Second Administrative Reforms Commission talks about. And that is the reason why it has been a failure. We don't involve the citizens in service delivery mechanisms. We did not focus, as we studied in the previous questions, we did not focus on improving the capabilities of bureaucracy, civil servants. And third one is GRM is the weakest aspect of Indian administration. I have applied for passport, I have applied for ration card. If I am not getting my ration card within 15 days as part of the Sevatham scheme, what can I do? Whom can I complain? If I see corruption, for example, children are studying in government schools and the quality of education is so bad, what is the GRM available to parents of the children? Grievance redressal mechanism. Take the case of these primary health care centers, PHCs, they do not exist. And there is no GRM also. Sevatham has been a failure. And then of course you talk about what should be done. Next, the national policy on disaster management envisages a paradigm shift from hitherto reactive post-disaster relief centric regime to more proactive and enabling environment. Examine the responses of state governments in this regard. As we said, why disaster management is a failure in India? Why do we say that DM is a failure in India? Disaster management has four important parts. One is a mitigation or prevention, then preparedness, then response, then recovery and rehabilitation. It is what we call a disaster cycle. So in India, disaster management mostly is restricted to only response. And that is the reason why we said that disaster management in India either is a disaster of management or management of disaster. It is not true disaster management. And especially what we have said is that state governments simply did not show any kind of interest in disaster management. They simply did not show any kind of interest in disaster management. Why? Why none of the state governments really have shown any kind of interest in disaster management? First and foremost, it is not an issue that determines electoral outcomes. It is not an issue that determines electoral outcomes. For example, again I am saying Maharashtra, the whole of Maharashtra in recent times has seen severe floods. Severe floods. But does it impact the electoral prospects of BJP? There will be flooding of votes this time in favor of BJP. Because people, do not consider disaster management an issue that should determine electoral outcomes. What are the issues that determine electoral outcomes in India? Subsidies. Give them more subsidies. Loan waivers. That is the only thing that determines political populism. None of the state governments really bother. And that is why none of the, even Nitish Kumar also has said that when someone talked about floods in Patna, he said that even America also has floods. Now that Bihar has floods means Bihar has become America. What Fred Ricks talked about, transformation of a society from prismatic to diffracted. America has floods, Bihar also has floods, so Bihar has become America. That is what we say. Unfortunately, that is what. And second, lack of awareness among the people about the impact of disasters, as we have said. Lack of awareness. Third one is high levels of corruption in disaster management, disaster of management. Next, bureaucracy, bureaucratic inertia. Bureaucracy, colonial bureaucracy simply does not have either the skills or the attitude to tackle disasters. Next, none of the state governments have come out with any proper infrastructure. State, SRDFs. We have SDRF teams. We have only NDRF, National Disaster Relief. For example, if you look at the map of India, this eastern part of the southeastern part of the country is always prone to cyclones. You have states like Bengal, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and towards here Kerala. This entire coast is always prone to floods. Obviously, what should the state governments should do as part of disaster management? Every state must have SDRF teams. But how many states? Only Odisha has SDRF teams. None of the state governments really bother. If state governments have some amount of money, what do? They give more subsidies. That is what. Nobody is spending money on disaster relief. These coastal states, are always prone to floods. Nowadays, what is happening is that the western coast also is prone to more floods. This monsoon, what we are witnessing is that even western coast also has, right from Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Kerala. It is also prone to floods. None of the states have any disaster relief teams as such, in spite of the fact that they are always prone to disasters. Why? Because spending money on disaster relief, spending money on infrastructure, the state government should think that it is a waste. Why? Because as we say, people have very short memory. We forget the disasters very easily. We forget. How many of us remember what happened in Kerala last year? Floods. Even people of Kerala have forgotten. They could remember that again because this year also they have same kind of floods. then they could remember fondly what happened, sweet memories. That is what disaster becomes a part of their sweet memory. Why? Because as I said, any policy initiative can be successful only when there is commitment on the part of political executive, only when there is active participation of citizens. Both of them are not present in India. Both of them are not present in India. That is the reason why state government's response is much more less compared to the central government. Even central government also has not done much. As I said, in India we have what we call fatalistic attitude towards disasters. Whenever any disaster strikes, we consider it as a part of our fate, thinking that we have done something wrong in our past life. That is the reason why nature is taking revenge against us. That is how, and that is what second ERC talks about. Then you talk about what should be done, all the reforms that we have suggested in the class. Next, efforts to strengthen state finance commissions have faced apathy of state governments over the years, which has also affected the successive Central Finance Commission in recommending appropriate fiscal transfers to local bodies. Substantiate the answer with examples. This is what we keep on saying. As we discussed in the previous question also, at the state level, we have not implemented any reforms. As part of 73rd and 74th amendments, every state government must set up a state finance commission which should perform the functions similar to that of a central finance commission. So what are the functions of state finance commission? It should decide on vertical as well as horizontal devolution of tax revenues. Vertical devolution means between the state government and local bodies. Horizontal means between the local bodies. And not only that, the state finance commission also, like that of central finance commission, must suggest grants in aid to be given to the local bodies. But unfortunately, as we have said, none of the state governments really bother to set up state finance commissions. Those state governments which have set up state finance commissions, the recommendations are never implemented at all. As we gave the example of states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, wherein the funds which are allocated for local self-governments are being used to pay the salaries of state secretariat employees. When the central government objected to this, this happened when Mayawati was the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh. Central government objected to this, saying that how can you allocate the monies which are given to local bodies to be spent on salaries of state government employees. Mayawati has said that I will withdraw support to your government. And the Prime Minister has said that everything Mayawati does is Maya only. That is what happens. The problem is that, as I said, in the federal polity that we have, there is no accountability at all. And as the question says, it has impacted Central Finance Commission also. If you remember the next question also that they have asked, the 14th Finance Commission has recommended 5% of grants to be given directly to the local self-governments. But again, the monies should be transferred through state governments only. None of the state governments, as again we have given in the class, the statistics, functions, functionaries and finances. Big states like UP and Bihar, they have transferred less than 20% of finances to local bodies. Whereas the best performing state like Kerala has given only around 38% of finances to local bodies. Otherwise, the performance of all the state governments is very bad and extremely poor. Why? Because, as I said, these 73rd, 74th amendments were implemented only in letter, but never in spirit. That is the reason why even Central Finance Commission, 14th Finance Commission has said that 5% of tax revenues will be given to local bodies. It was not implemented for the simple reason that the money has to go through only state governments. And the state governments do not have any separate window for local self-governments also in their budgets. So that local self-governments, they simply don't know how much amount of money they should get and under what scheme they should get. Even centrally sponsored schemes also, the money is diverted by the state governments. Some of the states, in states like Andhra Pradesh, the money which has been given by the central government, for centrally sponsored schemes was diverted to finance the revenue expenditure of the state government. Why? Because central government cannot do anything. Why? Because this, most of the money that is being given through finance commission, it is unconditional grants. Even centrally sponsored schemes also, they cannot do anything if the money is diverted. State governments will say that we will decide how to spend the money. And most of the state governments, have you ever heard any state government setting up a state finance commission to give recommendations regarding distribution of tax revenues? Not at all. That is what the question talks about. So then, of course, what should be the solution? The solution, as we discussed, are reforms. As we discussed in the class also, recommendations of State Finance Commission should be made mandatory. The recommendations of State Finance Commission should be made mandatory. The second thing, as we have said, is that state budgets must have a separate window for local self-governments, so that local self-governments will know about how much amount of money they are getting. Third, the money given by the central government through central sector schemes as well as centrally sponsored schemes should be made conditional. That means the entire money should be spent through only local self-governments. And then outcome budget should be introduced for all developmental and welfare schemes. And as recommended, as suggested by 15th Finance Commission, whatever the money is given by the central government to the state government should be made conditional in terms of the ability of the state governments to implement developmental and welfare schemes. You can write about all those things. As you can see, most of the questions are related to financial part only. Center-state financial relations. I remember while discussing in the class, I said that it is the most important topic of our syllabus, center-state financial relations. As you can see, almost all the questions are related to them only. Next, accountability of regulatory bodies would address the problems of over-regulators and help them make them truly facilitators. Analyze the present status of regulators and suggest measures to induce accountability in the mechanism. We have discussed these things extensively in the class. What are the problems of regulatory bodies in India and how to make them accountable and efficient. So, what are the problems as we have suggested? First and foremost, credibility of these regulatory authorities. Second problem is regarding their domain. What is happening is that most of the regulatory bodies are fighting among themselves. SEBI is fighting with IRDA. IRDA will be fighting with PFRDA. PFRDA will be fighting with RBI. Everyone will be fighting among themselves rather than fighting for the consumers. And the third problem is that, as we have said, these regulatory bodies, their decisions are always questioned in a court of law. SEBI, the regulatory bodies have the power of a civil court. They have the powers of a civil court. They can only impose fines. If the fines are not paid, they will say fine. Beyond that, they cannot do anything. And then politicization of these regulatory bodies. Next problem is, these regulatory bodies have become parking lots for retired bureaucrats. Then we talked about all the solutions. This is only 10 marker. So you just mention the problems and come out with the solutions. Next, Niti Aayog has changed the way India strategized for economic development, but its effectiveness is yet to be seen, especially when its financial powers are far less than its predecessors. Analyze. And what is the criticism? If you remember in the class we have made of Niti Aayog, Niti Aayog has become nothing but a coffee shop where people come and have a cup of coffee and discuss everything under the sun and leave the place. Mamata Banerjee, when she was asked to attend the meeting of Niti Aayog, she said that I have enough coffee in Bengal. I don't need to come to Delhi. In Delhi there will not be coffee with Karan also. Coffee with Modi only, which is not a pleasant task for Mamata Banerjee. All through the time when you are drinking coffee, you have to see the face of Narendra Modi also. And that is the reason why recently when the Niti Aayog meetings are taking place, most of the chief ministers are abstaining themselves. They don't attend because it does not have any, it does not have any financial powers, unlike the planning commission. So, as we have said, in the class we talked about the significance of Niti Aayog, wherein we had given so many points. If you remember, we have said that if Niti Aayog members come to know about what we have discussed, immediately they will give us at least Bharat Ratna award, because they never thought that they would be regarded so highly by other people. Only those who prepare for UPSC think greatly about Niti Aayog, because only these unfortunate souls who prepare for UPSC are expected to read the reports of Niti Aayog for their preparation. And they also have to find out what are the points that really make Niti Aayog significant in the age of liberalization. And that is the reason why we have given so many points for Niti Aayog members to cry, they have tears of joy. Otherwise, it is nothing but a coffee shop, wherein people go there. Niti Aayog has hired so many professionals also as part of its research programs. Professionals from private sector were hired. They were paid huge amount of salaries, 1 lakh rupees per month. Per capita income of India is only 1,80,000 rupees, 18,000 rupees per year. These people are paid 1 lakh rupees per month to submit reports. After the reports are submitted, what happens? A dustbin is there as part of a Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Okay. So, you cannot write all these things in the examination. So, you have to talk about the fact that in spite of Niti Aayog does not possess any financial powers, it still continues to play a very significant role. There you have to talk about all the positive aspects of Niti Aayog. It is acting as an instrument of cooperative federalism. It acts as a research organization to provide much needed information. In the age of globalization, require public policy formulation becomes highly technical in nature. Here you bring in someone like DROR, public policy analysis. DROR, you study in paper 1, rationalist paradigm. What the DROR has suggested is that there must be separate academic institutions to conduct research in public policy analysis. Why? Because bureaucrats who are responsible for policy formulation do not have any technical knowledge about policy sciences. And Niti Aayog is performing that function at this point of time. Try to link paper 1 and Indian administration. DROR, public policy analysis, rationalist paradigm. Niti Aayog is helping the central government to formulate what we call rationalist policies. By collecting the information, by providing up-to-date information, by also conducting research at the local level about the effectiveness of developmental welfare schemes. Niti Aayog is doing the same thing not only for the central government, it is also doing the same thing for the state governments also. Most of the state governments are taking the help of Niti Aayog, to see the effectiveness of their developmental and welfare schemes. Niti Aayog, with its academic strength, it has so many research scholars working for them. They would go to the ground level, conduct research and provide unbiased feedback. Why? Because the feedback received by the government from bureaucracy, the district collectors, is never unbiased. Any district collector that sends report to the state government regarding the implementation of developmental schemes would always say that the schemes have been implemented so effectively that people are crying. Please stop with these welfare schemes. Let us live in poverty for some time. At least, we have the right to live in poverty also. You are taking away our fundamental right by implementing so many schemes. That is what I said sometime back also in our class. The report of Ministry of Health, it has said that if you want to find what is malnourishment, go to Oxford Dictionary to know about the meaning of malnourishment. Don't come to India. In India, all our children are so healthy that they are overnourished but not malnourished. And at the same time, when the Ministry of Health came out with this report, the United Nations also came out with the MDPI, Multidimensional Poverty Index, wherein it has said that every second child in India is malnourished. That is the kind of reference, and that is where Niti Aayog. Why should United Nations conduct research in India and come out with these conclusions? This job can be done by Niti Aayog, and that is what Niti Aayog is doing at the ground level. For example, the last year Niti Aayog report on water crisis in India, Mihir Shah committee, I think, Mihir Shah committee. The recent Niti Aayog reports on decision management of public sector enterprises. The recent report of Niti Aayog on agriculture. These are the reports which are gold mines for the government if the government really wants to implement them. Similarly, the reports submitted by Niti Aayog, especially for state governments, they can be used as vital inputs by the state governments, provided they are willing. That is what you have to write. You have to say that Niti Aayog does not have real financial powers, which is also a boon. Why? Because Planning Commission with its financial powers had become the major obstacle in ensuring cooperative federalism. So that is what you have to write. So first part of the question, whatever I have discussed, you forget about it. Don't write all those things. Even though the law and order administration is a state subject, it is paradoxical that central agencies, NIA, parliamentary forces under the union government have restricted the powers of state government. Discuss. Again, the same statement you can see in our class notes also. Even though law and order, that is what, copyright, we cannot do anything. India is a country with extremely poor copyright laws, and UPSC, absolutely, is it there or not in our class notes? I remember. The paradox here is that state governments, are, saying that they do not want law and order to be taken away from the state list to the concurrent list, saying that law and order should be a state list. But at the same time, what we are witnessing is central government interference, indirect interference in the maintenance of law and order at the state level, with increasing prominence of central police organizations, whether it is CBI, whether it is this NIA, whether it is CRPF or BSF or other central paramilitary forces. Every state government, the first thing they would request is the presence of these forces, central paramilitary forces. What is the paradox here? The paradox here is that state governments, are stubborn in their response when it comes to shifting law and order from the state list to the concurrent list. At the same time, they are more than happy to let these central paramilitary forces and central police organizations to play a dominant role in maintaining law and order. Why this paradox? For the simple reason that state governments have recognized the fact that they neither have the manpower, nor knowledge, nor technology, nor skills to tackle the 21st century law and order problems. They neither have the manpower, nor skills, nor technology. So, to tackle 21st century law and order problems. 21st century law and order problems have become, global in nature. We have the spread of what is called global terrorism. We have seen secessionism. We have seen regionalism. We have seen communalism. We have caste-based conflicts along with Naxalism, apart from financial crimes and cyber crimes. State government simply cannot tackle any of these problems. Their police force is too inadequate in terms of manpower, in terms of skills, in terms of technology. That is the reason why they are repeatedly requesting. Recently there was a phenomena wherein some of the opposition ruled states have said that they would not allow CBI. CBI can investigate the cases only with the permission of the central government. Now the same opposition ruled states are asking CBI to investigate the cases in their states. And NIA has been given, recent amendments to NIA has given many powers to NIA to investigate the cases even without the permission of
the state governments. The difference between CBI and NIA is that CBI has to need a permission, whereas NIA can do it on its own. Okay. Why? As we have said, similarly, you look at all the states which are affected by Naxalism. They always want more presence of Central Paramilitary Forces, CRPF. And border states always want presence of BSF, Border Security Force. And similarly, as I said, other central police organizations are requested to come to the rescue of state governments. There is no paradox here. There is no paradox here for the simple reason that state governments are not in a position to tackle all these problems. They needed the assistance of central government. But at the same time, state governments do not want to convert de facto into de jure. De facto central interference into de jure central interference by transferring law and order from state list to concurrent list. They want the help of central government. They do not want interference by the central government. That is what you have to write. They want the central paramilitary forces to supplement and complement their state police forces, but not central government to substitute the state governments. That is what you have to write. And ultimately you can write that as part of solutions, after implementing other police reforms, as suggested by second ERC or other commissions and committees, we can transfer law and order from the state list to the concurrent list also. That is what you have to write. Next, performance grants devolved by Finance Commission of India have increased the financial accountability of local bodies. Elaborate. So, in the 14th Finance Commission, what did the Finance Commission do? In the 14th Finance Commission, Finance Commission has said that local bodies will be given 5% of funds directly, and this 5% of funds will be given to local bodies on the basis of their performance. The funds given to local bodies are divided into basic grants and performance grants. The funds that are given to local bodies, they are divided into basic grants and performance grants. 70% basic and 30% performance grants. That means these performance grants are given only when the local bodies show the adequate performance which has been fixed by Finance Commission. And definitely it has improved. As this year economic survey also talks about those states which have performed well in implementation of centrally sponsored schemes and other welfare schemes have received more grants compared to those states which do not. Give the example of NREGA in South Indian states. Give the example of Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, again South Indian states. Give the example of Food Security Act. They have got more money than the other states. Why? Because these states have performed well at the local level. They were able to utilize what we call performance grants. All the states, all the local bodies will be getting 70% basic grants, which are given to them irrespective of their performance. Remaining 30% is what we call performance grants. And these South Indian states, because of better governance structures at the local level, they are able to implement the schemes more efficiently, as economic survey says. Even Swachh Bharat Abhiyan also. You name it, any other centrally sponsored scheme or any central sector scheme, these states have done well. They are able to utilize because of better. Whereas in North Indian and other states, as we say, the basic problem is governance deficit. Outlays are not transformed into outcomes. There is no participation of stakeholders. Take the case of self-help groups. As part of women empowerment, as part of gender budgeting, self-help groups are given a huge amount of money by the central government as part of women development. And 70% of the money which are allocated for self-help groups, the loans are also taken by only South Indian states. That is what you have to talk about. There is no accountability at the local level And as I said, bureaucratic inertia. Our bureaucracy is not properly trained. They are good at performing regulatory functions, but not developmental functions. Again, you go back to RICS. You go back to RICS. What do we say? Comparative public administration. Take all the civil servants. All of them will be undergoing the same kind of training in Labasna, IAS officers, BUTS officers. But they become efficient when they are posted in some states. They are inefficient in some other states. Why? Because of ecological factors. Ecological factors. Everything is interlinked here. Performance of centrally sponsored schemes, performance of bureaucracy, grants that you are getting from Finance Commission, and overall developmental indicators. Everything is interlinked here. In these South Indian states, they have developed a very good physical and social infrastructure, which ensured that bureaucracy always is made to improve its performance, because they could make bureaucracy accountable to the people for their performance in terms of implementing developmental welfare schemes, because of what we call well-developed local self-governments also. Whereas in other parts of the country, especially North Indian states, what do we say? It is the backwardness which results in illiteracy. With this illiteracy, lack of awareness, which again results in backwardness. What you call it as a vicious cycle. That is the reason why you have to improve governing structures. That is what we have to write for all these questions. As you can see, almost all the questions you have to ensure interlinkages, and you need good amount of facts to write answers. As I said, these facts you can get from economic survey. Half the questions you can have from economic survey only, and the rest of them are from second year recommendations and daily newspapers. So this is about this paper, and if you are writing well, out of 250, if you score 175, 180 also, I would not be surprised, provided there are no surprises in this paper. Is there any question, a single question which we have not discussed in the class from this paper? Those who attend our classes, they can tell me. The time has come for you people to speak truth. Of course, for that, you should also remember what we have discussed in the class also. And for people like you, yesterday is a part of ancient history, so it becomes difficult. Just go through our class notes. That should be more than enough. And of course, collect important information about public sector enterprises, central schemes, political developments, all these things. Otherwise, whatever we have discussed in the class notes, that should be more than sufficient. If you have any doubts, you can ask. About the question paper, if you have any doubts, you can ask. If there are no doubts, it is fine. Otherwise, tomorrow we will continue with our regular classes. Tomorrow we will start with paper 1 regular classes, and tomorrow we will be starting new GS batches also. We will be starting ethics tomorrow, and economy day after tomorrow. We will be starting these GS batches also. And on Sunday, I think Saturday we will have a public administration test series also. You can come for those things also if you are interested. So best of luck. We can meet tomorrow at the same time, 8 o'clock.